Welcome to a special edition of the Pensari Basketball YouTube channel's Mailbag edition. We're talking everything Scottie Barnes today, answering some of your questions. We're going to get into Scottie versus Cade, because recently Bill Simmons had his trade value report, and it's a list of 64 players, I believe it's 64 players that he believed had the most value. And while I was pleasantly surprised to see both Scottie and Cade listed in the top 20, I wasn't surprised to see Cade listed a spot above Scottie Barnes. And I just want to talk about the analytics, right? Number one, I want to talk about anchoring bias, the analytics, and just how these two prospects are talked about and why I think that might be, right? First. And then I'm going to tell you why I believe that the perception and the reality are a bit skewed in terms of how we talk about Scottie Barnes versus Cade Cunningham. So let's get into it. First of all, I want to say that when we, as NBA fans, when we hear about a prospect, unless you're a sleuth, right? Unless you're a scout, unless you're one of those draft nerds, you probably didn't hear about Scottie Barnes until he was at Florida State. And then you started hearing buzz about him being a top 10 pick. You probably didn't hear about Cade Cunningham until he was at Montverde, and maybe until he went to Oklahoma State, and then you started hearing about him being the consensus number one pick, right? Okay, so when you hear about somebody in this light, you usually hear a lot of flowery language used to describe them, right? With Cade, it was, he's a jumbo playmaker. He's got gifted passing. He's super long. He's really smooth. He's an alpha scorer. He's the next Luka Doncic. All of these things paint a picture of a guy who's a de facto superstar. Okay, this is a guy that you want to build your team around. This is the type of player that every team is looking for, is an offensive engine. One of the biggest, I think, player types that teams are looking for in the draft, especially the top end of the draft, are guys that you can just literally put on a team and they just raise your level by 20 wins. That's LeBron James, right? It's I call it the LeBron Luka archetype, right? Of a guy who just, when you have him, you can't lose, right? Just put some rim running bigs, put some shooters around him, and he's going to carry you to 45 wins. And if you get him a complimentary star, you're probably going to be a title favorite. That's just the archetype, okay? With Scottie, what we heard was a lot of Draymond Green, right? Complimentary role player. Can't score, right? The problem is that when we're talking about high school, right? If you filter out the high school games where these guys were just beating up on teams that they had no business playing against, usually you're talking about 4 or 5 games where they played some serious competition, maybe some state championships. And in college, usually you're talking about 30 games. And again, when you filter those out for serious competition, you're usually looking at 10 games. So for most pro scouts, when they make a conclusion about a prospect, especially at that early age when they haven't had, 3-4 years of college, it's usually a very selective sample of, I want to say 15 to 16 games. Maybe a Team USA showing, a U19, whatever. And we base a lot of our conclusions about who a guy is going to be at that age. Now, I want to say that when we are introduced to someone that's, as polished as Cade, right, versus someone as raw as Scottie, right, there's usually a lot of anchoring bias that I want to talk about in this episode that really colors and taints our perception of a particular player. So if I were to tell you that the next Draymond Green is a better player than the next LeBron/Luka, you're going to think I'm insane, right? So let's just change one variable right away. Scottie Barnes was never the next Draymond Green, okay? I watched Draymond Green for 10 plus years now. Trust me, I watched Scottie Barnes for the last 4 years. There's very little other than the fact that he played a very complimentary Draymond-esque role at Montverde that would suggest to me that these are comparable players. First of all, Scottie is bigger. Secondly, Scottie is way more athletic. He's a much better scorer. He's just further along at a much younger age. There's so much to say that he's not like Draymond. If anything, I think the more accurate perception of him would be a Magic Johnson / Scottie Pippen / Giannis Antetokounmpo. I think that those are more fair comparisons to Kawhi Leonard, right? So immediately we have changed the type of prospect that we're comparing these guys to. And don't even get me started about the hilarity of player comps. Now, what about Cade, right? He's been compared to Luka Doncic, right? He's been compared to Grant Hill. I understand why he's been compared to Grant Hill. They're both light-skinned guys who play point and they're big. But is he as athletic as Grant Hill? No, he's not, right? Is he as big and strong as Luka? No, he's not. He was billed as a 6'8" jumbo creator. I want to talk about those two things. Number one, jumbo creator. If you look at his stats at Oklahoma State, this guy had almost as many turnovers as assists. Now, we glossed over that. We glossed over that because it was not convenient to talk about that, right? We glossed over it because it wasn't part of the narrative. It doesn't suit what we want to see. So we just said, well, he had trash teammates. Ignoring the fact that if you are a jumbo creator and you are the next Luka Doncic and you are the next Grant Hill, chances are your teammates are probably going to look much better than they are. It's not necessarily the case for Cade Cunningham. Now let's talk about the jumbo part. Initially billed as 6'8", but when you see him standing next to someone who's about 6'6", you say, this guy looks about 6'5", 6'6". So he's not that jumbo. He's about the same size as Moses Moody, maybe an inch taller. That's not a jumbo creator. I mean, it's big for a point guard, provided you think he's a point guard, which I don't. So a lot of this has to be factored in. One guy being very much overrated, another guy being extremely underrated. And I'm sorry if you're a Detroit fan and you think, hey, wait. Didn't you see Cade the last month of the season? He was awesome. Yeah. I saw Malachi Flynn be awesome for the last month of the season. I saw Davion Mitchell be awesome for the last month of the season. There's a lot of rookies out there who are awesome for 1 month of the season. But I want to talk about what Scottie did last year. And I want to just get into the analytics because, right now I'm just talking biases. I'm talking, measurements. Let's talk about the analytics in terms of how these two guys are presented because they're the same age. They're both college freshmen. It's not like I'm comparing a college senior to a college freshman. I'm not comparing apples and oranges here. I'm comparing two guys who were in the same class, who had, functionally, I mean, if you want to look at Scottie as a creator in the Raptors offense, right? We can say that he played a lot of point towards the end of the year. He even started at point in the playoffs, right? Against the frigging Philadelphia 76ers. He was the point guard, right? When Fred VanVleet went out, who was running point for the Raptors? It was Scottie Barnes, right? When Fred VanVleet was nursing that hip injury through most of the second half of the season, who was running point on the games that he missed? Scottie Barnes. Scottie Barnes was starting at point guard. Who was the backup point guard for the Raptors? So I think a little bit of that gets lost is that Scottie and Cade played a pretty similar role. But if you're a Detroit fan or if you're a Cade fan, what are you going to say? You're going to say, well, Scottie just had so much more to work with. He just had better teammates. I want to remind you that Scottie Barnes came into Toronto to replace Kyle Lowry. That's a guy who just got a $30 million contract, a $28 million contract from the Miami Heat, the greatest Raptor of all time. That's the guy he was asked to replace in the starting lineup. No other real replacement was made in the starting lineup. Kem Birch was still starting for most of the season, the games that he played. Pascal Siakam, Gary Trent Jr., Fred VanVleet, right? OG, like Pascal. These are the same players. These are the same players. So what was the big difference in the Raptors' wins other than Scottie Barnes? Okay, you can say Pascal got better. Sure. You can, but OG missed way more games. I think OG played 40-something games this year. Siakam missed the entire beginning of the season. For like the first month and a half he missed, right? Fred VanVleet was injured for the entire second half of the season. Look, if the Raptors had ended up with the exact same record that they had in Tampa, what would we have said? We would have said, well, OG missed half the season. He's a really important defender. Fred VanVleet was injured for the second half of the season. He was a really important player for them in the first half. Pascal Siakam didn't have a fully... Do you see what I mean? We can change the narrative pretty quickly to suit the fact that, well, But the Raptors made the playoffs. After finishing with the 7th worst record, they ended up fighting for home court in the playoffs. They were the 5th seed in a stacked Eastern Conference. And when I look at the analytics, it's pretty clear to see that Scottie Barnes was a really big part of that. Not only was he the minutes leader for the Toronto Raptors as a rookie, 74 games played nicked. He had tic-tac injuries. He had that thumb thing. He had a knee, he rolled his ankle. Like he had injuries throughout the year, right? It's not like he had a completely clean bill of health. He played hurt a few games too. I'm sure that impacted his numbers, his overall numbers. So let's talk about those overall numbers. But let's talk about the analytics. 6.6 win shares, led all rookies. How many did Cade have? Cade did not have a single win share. Negative 0.5. What about value over replacement? Scottie Barnes, 1.9. Cade, 0.2. Right? Defensive box plus minus. Scottie wins out there too. Positive 0.4. Right? What about Cade? Negative 0.5. Right? When we talk about turnover percentage, 11.7 for Scottie Barnes. Cade, 17.5. Right? What about true shooting? Right? Cade's the shooter, right? Scottie's the non-scorer. 55.2% for Scottie Barnes, 50% for Cade Cunningham. Right? What about 3-point percentage? Okay, this has got to be the big ace in the hole, right? For Cade Cunningham. He's got to be like just lights out better shooter, right? 31%. 31.4%. What was Scottie? 30.1%. It's a 1 point. It's barely a 1% difference, man. A 1% difference. He was better at getting to the line. Scottie Barnes, per 36 minutes. How many free throw attempts? 3. Cade, 2.9. Right. What about rebounds? Scottie Barnes, 7.7. You could say the assists are in Cade's favor because he handled the ball more. Okay? He handled the ball in so many possessions. What about usage? Let's talk about usage, right? 27.5%. Scottie, 19%. You don't think that Scottie Barnes played better in the games where he handled the ball more? He did. Per Crafted's defensive plus minus, Cade was a 40th percentile defender. Now, defense is one of the hardest things for rookies to grasp, so I don't think 40th percentile is all that bad. For a guy who's a point of attack defender, playing the point guard, probably not a position he should be playing, I don't think that's bad. I watched a lot of Cade this year. He was pretty decent on defense, but he was a 40th percentile defender, and Scottie was a 64th percentile defender. Okay, well, you might say to me, well, Scottie's a defensive prospect, right? Clearly, where Cade is going to shine is on the offensive end. Well, Cade was a 46th percentile offensive player, which is actually pretty decent for a guy who carried his load. But what about Scottie? He was a 58th percentile offensive player, and he also had a pretty decent load, right? So, look, well, what are we talking about here? We are talking about two players who had immeasurably different impacts on their team throughout the year. Everything you wanted to say about Scottie, everything you wanted to say about Cade Cunningham coming into the season, that he's a jumbo creator, that's what Scottie Barnes was, man. That's what Scottie Barnes was for the Raptors. He was a jumbo creator. Yeah, a lot of his offense came off of offensive rebounds, and some of it was created for him. But Scottie Barnes created the vast majority of his offense for himself. And you just have to watch him. You just have to watch the guy. Now, the other part of this is team success. Look, when you get a first overall pick that's supposed to be a generational player in a generational draft, you expect that to have some level of impact on your win-loss column. Okay? I think LeBron James came in high school and he made the Cleveland Cavaliers immediately better. He didn't get into the playoffs, but he made them way better. Evan Mobley made the Cavaliers way better. Okay? And I'm sorry to say, but Scottie Barnes made the Raptors better. He got them from 27 wins in Tampa? Granted, okay, you'll say, okay, they were tanking, they were this. They were out of it. There's a reason they tanked. Yeah, they may have lost 4 or 5 extra games down the stretch. But this was a really bad team the year before. They had Aaron Baines running center. Kyle Lowry was hurt and aging. Fred VanVleet missed time. OG Anunoby had COVID. Pascal Siakam had COVID. There's a lot of things that went wrong for the Raptors, right? But it's not like the Raptors had this dream season, a clean bill of health. I mean, every single starter missed major time. Well, the three main starters that you would consider the main cogs of the Raptors offense prior to this season missed massive amounts of time. OG Anunoby missed half the season. You know how valuable he is. Pascal Siakam, who's your best player, and Fred VanVleet, your lone all-star, all of these guys missed over 15 games. So there's a very good case to be made that a really big part of why the Raptors were good last year was Scottie Barnes, which is exactly the type of impact that you would expect a first overall pick to have. But that's not the type of impact that Cade had on the Pistons, who were still a bottom 3 team last year. So I think we need to change the way we talk about these two players. Now, I'm not telling you. Now, let's evaluate the other side. Cade had more responsibility. He had worse teammates. He had a functionally more difficult role on offense, initiator. He was facing more double teams. I get all of that. Scottie faced some double teams too. Not to the level of Cade, and I get that. How would Scottie Barnes have dealt with those double teams? Well, first of all, I want to talk about one of the key differences between these two players. I think Scottie's a way better passer. I think he's a way better passer. I think if you double Scottie Barnes, it's going to play right into his hands. I think he wants people to double team him because he's going to find shooters left, right, and center. I think Scottie is built for double teams. So I don't necessarily think the fact that Cade got doubled is this huge thing. It just so happens that there's a lot of turnovers, right, with Cade that, I mean, this is just a function of being asked to do more than you can realistically do. Okay? Everyone sees in Cade what they want to see. They see a jumbo creator. I don't. They see an alpha scorer. I don't. I think Cade is going to have an awesome career. I think he's going to be an all-star. I think he's going to be a really good player. Okay? These numbers that I presented to you paint the picture of a guy who, among NBA rotation players, as in players who played over 350 minutes, he's a slightly below average NBA player right now, given his role, right? A 91th percentile load as a rookie is really difficult. And I'm not denying that Scottie didn't have nearly close to that role. But what I'm telling you is that based on every number on the planet that you could actually look at, the largest sample size that you have says that one of these players is definitively better than the other. Not even close. Not in the same ballpark. Okay? We're not talking Evan Mobley versus Scottie Barnes, where it is really close. We're talking Cade versus Scottie, where it's not close. It's not close. It might get closer. Okay? It might get closer. It might end up in Cade's favor at some point. I'm not denying that Cade could end up the better player. He very well could end up the better player. He could. But I'm telling you that nothing that I have seen at Oklahoma State, nothing that I've seen at Florida State, nothing I've seen in the NBA, nothing I've seen with the Pistons or the Raptors would tell me that this is so definitively Cade over Scottie. It doesn't make sense to me. I'm sorry. Every number on the planet would tell you that Scottie Barnes is a better player last year. He impacted winning more. He was a better player. He was more efficient. He was a better defender. He did everything on the basketball court better. Pretty much. Other than shooting 1.5% from three. But he shot better from the field. We see what we want to see with these prospects. But what I'm asking you is to maybe give the 82 games that you just watched more precedence than a 30-game college season or 5 games in college or a highlight reel. What we do when we evaluate prospects is we're evaluating them at a perspective, at a point in time where you're meeting that prospect. Maybe, some of these COVID prospects, I call them COVID prospects, and kids who had, an entire season derailed because of COVID. They couldn't go into gyms, they were wearing masks, etc. Maybe you just met them during a really bad month and that prospect got massively underrated. That's how I feel about Peyton Watson, right? I think if you play out Peyton Watson's high school, college career one more time and he goes to a different school and maybe he doesn't have his entire high school season cut by COVID, we're talking about a top 10 pick instead of a guy who went 30th. It happens. As scouts, we are evaluating players at a dot in a very long trajectory. And based on a couple, like 2-3 dots, based on where the guy was in grade 9 versus where he was in grade 12 versus where he was in first year university, right? We're trying to draw out the rest of it. We're trying to draw out the curve. We're saying, okay, well, this guy was this way in grade 7 and he got 100 times better. So he's going to keep getting 100 times better and he's going to be the superstar. But you don't know that. You don't know that. Some players don't grow like that. Some players have unpredictable growth spurts, right? You could not have predicted based on who Giannis was as a rookie that he'd become this today. I don't care how smart you think you are. I don't care how smart I think I am. No one saw this coming, right? What you can, however, watch for is, does the guy love basketball? Does he create space? Is he a self-aware prospect who understands his strengths and weaknesses? Does he make people better? Is he the type of person who keeps his head clean off the court? Right? Is he in a good enough system with good enough coaches? Right? I have no doubt that if Cade Cunningham became a Toronto Raptor and Scottie had become the Detroit Piston, that Cade would have had a better season. I have no doubt. No doubt. But where a prospect ends up, Keegan Murray ending up in Sacramento, right? That changes the trajectory of, just like where a player goes to school, right? It's just like where you live impacts your mental health. Well, you know what? Playing in Sacramento and playing in Golden State are not the same thing, right? So we're going to say that Davion Mitchell is going to have a different career because he plays for the Kings than he would have had he been drafted, a few picks earlier and gone and played for the Warriors. We're going to say that certain teams do a better job. So the amount of money, the amount of resources that the Raptors are going to invest in Scottie's development versus, Nick Nurse as a coach, putting him in the right positions, the strength and development team. You're meeting a kid at 19, 20 years old, and you don't even know what they are yet. But I'm telling you that the odds that a kid is going to become a superstar under the Raptors system versus under Nick Nurse and Masai Ujiri and this strength and development team and look at the Raptors, OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam, Fred VanVleet. None of these guys were better players at 19 or 20 than Scottie Barnes. All of them are really good players today. 2 of them are all-stars. 1 of them is an all-NBA guy. What's Scottie going to become? The only thing that can stop Scottie Barnes from becoming one of the top 5, top 6 players in the NBA is Scottie Barnes. Or, freaky injury or something like that. I don't see that same pathway for Cade in Detroit. So this is a long, rambling rant that I'm just sick and tired of hearing that Cade is a better prospect than Scottie because he was better in high school. He played a different role in high school. His strengths and weaknesses have been pretty much the same, man. If you've watched Cade long enough, the moves are pretty much the same. The body is pretty much the same. The athleticism is pretty much the same. The shot is pretty much the same. I've seen the same player for 3 years. 1, 2, 3. 3 years. Yeah. Montverde, Oklahoma State. Same weaknesses. High turnovers. Yup. Smooth shot. Yup. Nice handle. Yup. Creative. Yup. Pesky defender. Yup. I see it all. But with Scottie, I'm seeing new things every week. Now, before we exit here, we do have some mailbag questions, so let's get to them. Dave asks, is the comparison to Magic Johnson fair? Look, I don't think any comparison to a top 10 player is ever fair. Okay, I think it's somewhat ridiculous. I think Magic was a better college player than Scottie. I think Magic was a better rookie than Scottie. I think they're pretty different players. But in terms of, how comparisons are done, which is to say, hey, does this guy remind you of this other guy for, 10, 12 plays a year? Yeah, sure. I get it. And, Scottie's a very unique prospect. I think he's more athletic than Magic. I think he's a better defender than Magic. I think he's probably some sort of weird combination of Magic plus Scottie Pippen plus Kawhi plus Giannis plus, there's a lot of different influences in his game, and you can just tell that he's an old school hooper. And obviously he watched Magic Johnson, so you can understand that there's that no look every now and again. But in terms of, pure point guard, in Magic Johnson, you're talking about the greatest pure point guard, and I'm not even sure Scottie's a point guard at this point. But so I don't think it's necessarily fair, although I have myself made that comparison before, and I totally understand why people make it. Could Barnes be a full-time point guard? Thinking specifically of all the 6-7-ish switchable lineup, could he run the point exclusively? Well, a bit of a loaded question, because I don't necessarily think he'd be an exclusive point guard, because you do have Fred VanVleet here. Could he be, and again, okay, so who are you, right? So like the defensive thing is that Larry Brown used to say that you are who you guard, right? Do I think Scottie Barnes can guard point guards? Not necessarily, no. I think unless he gets a lot quicker and his hips get a little bit more mobile than they were last year, and it seems like he's kind of going the other direction, getting a lot stronger, it seems hard for me to imagine him sticking in front of Tyrese Maxey and Ja Morant, right? So I think it's going to be a little bit difficult. Could he be a Luka-like, offensive hub, heliocentric type of guy? Yeah, I think he could be that kind of guy. I think his decision making is awesome. His vision for the game is awesome. His game management, something that I've been very critical about. Donovan Mitchell, not the best game manager, kind of feels his own rhythm. Scottie seems to find the hot hand more often than not. He seems to find open cutters. I think he's really good. So would I like to see this, Scottie on the ball 90% of the game, whereas Fred kind of floats off the ball? Because, and again, I think one of the main things about Scottie as a point guard that's a huge advantage is just the mismatch ability, right? Number one is the mismatch ability is such a huge advantage, because you're always going to have a player who's smaller than him on the court for him to hunt. There's no team out there who can put out 5 guys who are bigger than him at the same time without crumbling. He's huge. He's a huge human being. He's like 6'8", 240. He's probably going to come into the season 245. He's massive, right? So if you have him as your small, it's going to be mismatch hunting all game. So that's kind of the cool side of it. But yeah, like I think exclusively might be a stretch, but I like the concept of bringing him along as your backup point guard in the absence of an actual backup point guard this year, and just seeing how he runs that second unit, because I think that those second unit guys, they need a lot of creation. They need guys who can actually create for them, and I think it's going to be good for the Raptors to have Scottie run point for them. Okay, Daryl asks, so 2 questions. I know including Scottie in a trade package for Kevin Durant is a non-starter. Thank you for saying that. For you, and hopefully for most of us. In a hypothetical world, would you trade him for Durant straight up 1-for-1? Is there anyone you would trade Scottie for? Okay, first of all, there's no one that I would trade Scottie for, just because I'm just the biggest Scottie Barnes fan, and I want to be on the record saying that I would not trade him for anybody. But if I wasn't myself, and if I was just a totally rational basketball fan person, I think it would be very difficult right now to say that you wouldn't trade him for Giannis, Jason Tatum, Luka Doncic, Ja Morant, possibly Zion if he's healthy, Evan Mobley. There's a few guys in this league that you could say, based on the evidence we have right now, it's more certain that those guys are going to be top 5 players than he will. I just think that Scottie has a lot of those intangible qualities that, make you a better organization. I think he's really invested in the youth. I think, I used to say this about Tim Duncan. It's like, you don't measure Tim Duncan through the box score. You measure Tim Duncan through his impact on the entire organization, his stabilizing, impact and on the locker room. And I think that those things matter. I think that he's a really big reason why a lot of the guys around him became stars, right? His unselfishness, his professionalism, his work ethic. And I think Scottie has a lot of the same stuff. You see him sitting through Summer League right now, and he's sitting there for, through a 20-point blowout, and he's not leaving. And he could leave, right? No one's going to judge him for leaving when the game is totally out of the balance and it's a bunch of, guys not playing very well. But he's sitting there just rooting them on. And I think that those small things have a really big impact on the development of a Justin Champagnie or an impact on the growth of Christian Coloco. Just a guy who's a leader in your locker room who can do that. So I wouldn't trade him for anyone personally, because I think that Scottie Barnes is the type of person that you win championships with. But I can understand why there are fans out there who would have 14, 15, 18 players that you would trade him for, no problem. Would I trade him for KD straight up? No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't. And Kevin Durant was my favorite player growing up, and I just wouldn't. I think even though I know that KD is a way better player right now, I know that. I know that Kevin Durant will be a better player next year. I'm pretty sure Kevin Durant's going to be a better player for the next 3 years, right? That to me doesn't matter, because I think that Scottie Barnes loves being a Raptor. I think he's someone that you can build with for the next 14, 15 years if you play your cards right and he sticks around, right? This is the start of something, and I don't want to compromise the start of something to finish something else that I never started to begin with. Question number 2 is, what are a few realistic moves involving Scottie that you would see, that you could see would make the Raptors better now and in the future? Oh, okay. So your answers don't need to be limited to trading him. It could be acquiring someone who could really fit with him, a player, coach, masseuse, butler, scooter mechanic, or a change in the team's philosophy or attitude about his role. Basically, any management move that specifically involves Scottie Barnes. I would like to see more shooters around him. I would like to see guys who are a little less ball dominant, and I would like to see him have a lob target. Now, a lot of these issues are actually being resolved, because I think the Raptors do now have Otto Porter, who will play second unit, and Scottie will run the second unit a lot. I can definitely see that. So, for instance, I could see Fred VanVleet going to the bench, Otto Porter checking in for him, and Scottie moving to point. Immediately you have that shooter right next to him. I could see Precious Achiuwa and Christian Coloco being huge lob targets for Scottie, right? So I think that the way the Raptors are building around Scottie is already very sufficient. Now, if I was to go for a much more developed version of that, that would be pretty cool. I think the fit with Pascal is interesting. I didn't necessarily know if it would work, and at times it feels like these two players do get kind of in each other's way. So it would be more interesting, I think, to have a guy who's a little less similar to Scottie in terms of the places he likes to be on the court, and a guy who's a better shooter than Pascal. Now, if Pascal becomes the better shooter, then all of this is a moot point, right? You have the perfect fit. But I would like to see shooters and rim runners around Scottie Barnes, because I really do think that he can do a little bit of what Luka can do, minus the shooting, right? So in terms of like the downhill gravity, the post gravity, the double teams in the post, slashing and ripping defenses apart, and matchup hunting in the post and stuff like that. I think when you see Luka's gravity in the post, it's pretty intense, like how 3-4 guys are just honing in on him and how much that opens up the Mavericks offense. So I think players that fit better in that way. Okay. Ron asks, how tall is Scottie? I've seen him listed anywhere between 6'7" and 6'9". Well, you almost answered your own question. He is 6'8" and change. I have seen him standing next to someone who's 6'7", and he is definitely taller. And I've seen him standing next to someone who's 6'10", and he's a little bit shorter. So I would say the upper estimate is probably 6'8" without shoes, 6'9" with shoes. And yeah, that's what I'm going with, because I know his dad, if I'm not mistaken, is 6'6". If I'm not mistaken, someone correct me in the comments. And I've seen them standing next to each other, and Scottie was taller than him for sure. Like, it wasn't an inch or so. He was like taller than him, like by this much. So he's at least 6'8", could be 6'9". Okay, we have one more question here from Demetrius. I've got one quick question for you, for your show, if it's not too late. How do you feel about, say, Scottie Barnes being compared and given the expectations to other stars and past stars around the NBA? For me, I'm not a fan of it. I believe every player has their own persona, vibe, and to be honest, don't like some who don't like it when mentioned. In a way, I think they are being overlooked by the comparison. What are your thoughts? So I don't fully understand your question. I guess what you're trying to say is just the concept of comparisons. Look, I think comparisons are for fans, right? Because if you understand fan psychology, right, the mystery of the unknown with young players is a really big thing. That's why, whenever a team trades for 6 draft picks, the fan base is really excited because, it's 6 variables, 6 potentials, 6, we don't know, right? Very likely there's going to be 6 mid-20s picks that don't amount to anything, but there's a chance that one of those, Kinder eggs is Nikola Jokic or Giannis Antetokounmpo. So I understand why comparisons exist. It's for fans to latch on and envision what a player can be. And ultimately, later on, 5 years into that athlete's career, it is also for, media types and pundits to say how that player never lived up to the expectation of being the next Jordan, next LeBron, next whatever. I think you're right. I think comparisons are pretty stupid. I think Scottie's his own player. Obviously, the way he scores, it's reminiscent of certain players, but I've seen moments of Scottie Barnes where he reminds me of Rasheed Wallace, in the post. I've seen moments where his herky-jerky, dribbling reminds me of, another player, right? I've seen moments where he reminds me of Jason Tatum. Like, there's a lot of different influences in any one person's game. I think certain comparisons, here's where I really draw the line on comparisons. I hate comparisons where the guys kind of look alike. That I don't like. So I made a rule, like, among my friends. It's like, if you're going to tell me that a guy reminds you of somebody, it has to be somebody who's not the same ethnicity. And Daryl Morey has the exact same rule, by the way. And I think it's really good because it's so freaking tempting to compare every Chinese guard to Jeremy Lin and to compare every, mulatto wing to Cade or, or Grant Hill or Penny Hardaway. And it's just like, or, any light skinned guy to, or any big brute to Shaq. And it's like, yeah, like, until you understand the game, I don't really buy too much into these comparisons, but I see your point. And you know what? Like, let Scottie be, right? Let Scottie Barnes be the first Scottie Barnes. And he is his own man. He's on his own path and he's going to be his own player. So anyways, thank you so much. This has been our mailbag episode. We've hopefully talked your head off about Scottie versus Cade. You probably know that I'm pretty biased here, and I'm not. This is not shade to Cade. Okay, need for that to rhyme. I'm not throwing shade at Cade Cunningham. I think Cade Cunningham is an awesome player. If I could trade half our roster to get him, I probably would. Okay, it's not like I don't think the guy is going to be a really good player. I think he's going to be a really good player. I just get a little irritated when a guy who is just clearly better, had a way better season, is still underrated based on something he did 2 years ago in high school. Like, I just don't understand that. I don't understand why where a guy is today is less relevant than where he was 2 years ago. I just don't get it. And this is kind of like where I'm at with Shaedon Sharpe right now, right? I saw him struggle in that Solo Summer League game, and I'm just like, man, people are really obsessed with those high school highlights with this guy, but he did not, based on the evidence we have, did not deserve to go top 7 in this draft. And there are a lot of guys who showed so much. And whereas I understand the perils of living too far into the moment and not dreaming enough and not paying enough attention to the evidence and just being too locked in prisoner of the moment, like, if I'm the prisoner of the moment, Andrew Wiggins is a top 20 player, but he's not a top 20 player. He's not a top 40 player in the NBA, but I'm not surprised that a lot of people feel that way because of what we just watched a month ago, right? I'm not surprised that people suddenly think Andrew Wiggins is an all-star. He's not. But it's like you go too far into the other extreme where you become too nostalgic about what a guy is, and I think you sort of miss that the trajectory has more information now. So I'm in the information gathering business, right? If you give me more tracking data, more analytics, more proof, more sample size, I now have 4 playoff games to understand Scottie Barnes a little bit better. I don't have any playoff games for Cade. What if we get into the playoffs and Cade averages 36 points per game? Well, now I have a very different set of data and I can change my mind then. But so far, you can't tell me that Cade has done anything to suggest that he's going to be some massively like better player in the playoffs. You can't. The only thing you have right now are false comparisons that have no basis in reality. You have some high school footage. He wasn't dominant in college, right? And a kind of up and down season, which ended higher than it started. I'll tell you, if you filter out Cade's 10 worst games and Scottie's 10 worst games, Scottie's still way better. Way better. And trust me, I did it for the numbers. So people saying like, oh, it's just because Cade had a rocky start. Nope, it's not. It's not just a rocky start. And it's so much more than that. So I'm interested to see where these two players end up. I expect a much better season from Cade Cunningham this year. I expect the Pistons to be a little bit better, more competitive with Jaden Ivey, with Cade Cunningham. Killian Hayes is hitting threes in Summer League. And, you know, Saddiq Bey is one of my favorite young players in the NBA. And, you know, Jalen Durant should be awesome. So I'm a Piston buyer. I'm a Piston fan. I'm going to be watching Summer League. I just don't think the Cade's better than Scottie. Anyways, thanks for tuning in. Please hit subscribe if you haven't already. Please hit like. It really does help the algorithm. And, you know, we crossed 300 plus subscribers, which is pretty cool based on our last 3 videos. Hopefully we can keep this party going up till 500. And I'll keep trying to make interesting, polarizing, you know, content, and you can keep watching it. Peace.